The elevator doors slid open on the 42nd floor, and Fiona O'Brien clutched her portfolio tighter, reminding herself that this was just another pitch meeting, even if the office sprawled before her looked more like a modern art museum than a corporate headquarters. She had presented landscape architecture designs to dozens of clients over the past 5 years, but none of them had requested an emergency meeting at 8 in the evening on a Friday. The receptionist had already left for the weekend, leaving only dimmed overhead lights and the glow of the city beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. Fiona walked down the hallway, her heels clicking against polished marble, until she found the corner office with its door slightly ajar. "Mr. Garrett." She called out, pushing the door open wider. The man standing at the window turned around, and Fiona felt her breath catch slightly. Gabriel Garrett looked nothing like the stern-faced executive she had seen in business magazine photos. In person, he was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that looked like he had been running his hands through it all day. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up to his forearms, and there was something utterly exhausted in his gray eyes that made him seem almost vulnerable despite the obvious power he carried. "Miss O'Brien," he said, his voice deep and rough, "thank you for coming on such short notice. I know it's an unusual request." "It's fine," Fiona said, stepping inside and setting her portfolio on the conference table. "Your assistant said it was urgent regarding the Riverside project." Gabriel moved away from the window, and she noticed he was holding what looked like architectural plans, though they were crumpled at the edges. "I need you to scrap everything we discussed." Fiona blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "The entire design. The formal gardens, the geometric patterns, all of it." He tossed the plans onto the table. "I need something completely different." Fiona felt a flash of frustration. She had spent 3 weeks on those designs, carefully crafting something sophisticated and elegant for the luxury residential development he was building. "Mr. Garrett, we're 2 months from breaking ground. Starting over now would push back the entire timeline and significantly increase costs." "I don't care about the money," he said, and there was an edge to his voice that made her pause. "I care about creating something that actually matters." She studied him for a moment, noticing the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set. This was not just about landscaping. "What happened?" Gabriel laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "You want the honest answer. I spent the day at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for one of my other developments. Beautiful building, state-of-the-art amenities, exactly what the market research said people wanted. And you know what? It was soulless, completely empty of any real life or warmth." He met her eyes. "I don't want to build another sterile monument to wealth. I want to create something people actually love." Fiona set down her portfolio slowly. There was something raw in his admission that caught her off guard. In her experience, developers cared about profit margins and resale values, not emotional connections to spaces. "Okay," she said carefully. "What kind of feeling are you looking for?" "I don't know," Gabriel admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "That's the problem. I've been chasing success for so long that I forgot what actually makes a place feel like home. Every decision is based on data and projections, and somewhere along the way, I lost the ability to trust my own instincts." Fiona pulled out a chair and sat down, gesturing for him to do the same. When he hesitated, she raised an eyebrow. "If we're going to figure this out, you might as well get comfortable." He sat across from her, and she pulled out a blank sketch pad from her bag. "Tell me about a place that made you feel at home, somewhere from before all this." She gestured vaguely at the expensive office around them. Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, and Fiona thought he might refuse to answer. Then he said, "My grandmother's house in Vermont. She had this wild garden, completely overgrown, Nothing matched, nothing was planned. There were vegetables growing next to roses, herbs mixed with wildflowers. My mother used to complain it was a mess, but I loved it. I could spend hours exploring, finding something new every time. Fiona started sketching quickly, her hand moving across the paper. What else? There was a stone path, but half the stones were missing, so moss grew in the gaps. And she had this old arbor covered in grapevines. In the summer, you could sit underneath and eat grapes straight off the vine. His voice had softened, and when Fiona glanced up, she saw his expression had changed completely. This might sound crazy, but, she started, hesitating only briefly. What if we designed the Riverside gardens to feel like that? Not literally replicated, but capturing that same sense of organic growth and discovery. Winding paths instead of straight lines, mixed plantings that look almost accidental, hidden corners and unexpected moments. Gabriel leaned forward, his gray eyes intent on hers. Crazy is exactly what I needed. Fiona felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, at the way he was looking at her like she had just offered him something precious. She cleared her throat and focused back on her sketch. The traditional approach for luxury developments is to signal wealth and order. But what if instead we created spaces that feel generous and abundant? Places where kids can pick berries and adults can find a quiet bench hidden behind flowering shrubs. Yes, Gabriel said immediately. Exactly that. They spent the next 2 hours bent over her sketchpad together, their heads close as Fiona drew quick concepts, and Gabriel pointed out elements he liked or wanted to adjust. At some point, he ordered food from a nearby restaurant that was apparently used to delivering to his office at odd hours. They ate Thai food straight from the containers while debating the merits of different types of fruit trees. You know this is going to be more expensive to maintain, Fiona warned him, even as she drew an orchard space between building clusters. Wild-looking gardens actually require a lot of careful management to keep them from becoming truly chaotic. Like I said, I don't care about the money. Gabriel picked up one of her colored pencils and added a rough line to her sketch. What about a community garden space here, with plots people can actually use? Fiona looked at him with genuine surprise. That would reduce the amount of purely decorative space significantly. Most developers want maximum visual impact. Most developers are idiots, Gabriel said bluntly, including me. Up until about 3 hours ago, she laughed, unable to help herself. I wouldn't go that far. You're being generous. He set down the pencil and met her eyes. Can I ask you something? Why did you become a landscape architect? The question caught Fiona off guard. Most clients never asked about her personal motivations. My dad was a park ranger, she said slowly. Growing up, I spent every summer hiking and camping. He taught me to notice things, the way water flows and shapes land, how different plants support each other, which animals depend on which habitats. I wanted to bring some of that intentionality to urban spaces, to create places where nature and people can coexist in cities. That's beautiful, Gabriel said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made her pulse quicken. She looked away, suddenly aware of how intimate this felt, sitting together in his dimly lit office with sketches scattered between them and the city lights twinkling beyond the windows. It's getting late, she said, checking her phone and seeing it was nearly 11. I should head home and start working on proper designs from these concepts. Right, of course. Gabriel stood quickly, and she thought she detected reluctance in his movement. When can we meet again to review? Give me a week to develop these properly, Fiona said, gathering her things. I'll need to research some specific plant varieties and work out the maintenance schedules. What about tomorrow? Gabriel asked, then seemed to realize how that sounded. I mean, not for work. But if you're serious about capturing that feeling of natural exploration, you should see some examples. There's a botanical garden about an hour north of here that has some incredible naturalistic plantings. Fiona knew she should say no. This was crossing a line from professional to personal, and Gabriel Garrett was not just any client. He was one of the most successful real estate developers on the East Coast, a millionaire several times over, and getting involved with him beyond business was complicated at best and career-sabotaging at worst. But when she looked at him, she saw not the intimidating businessman from magazine covers, but the man who missed his grandmother's chaotic garden and wanted to create something with soul. "What time?" she heard herself say. The smile that broke across Gabriel's face was radiant. "I'll pick you up at 9. The botanical garden was nothing like Fiona expected. Instead of formal beds and manicured lawns, it sprawled across hillsides in a riotous celebration of color and texture. Gabriel had barely said anything during the drive, but he seemed more relaxed than he had in his office, wearing jeans and a dark sweater instead of a suit. They wandered the paths together, Fiona occasionally stopping to photograph plants or jot notes in the small journal she always carried. Gabriel stayed close, asking questions about why certain plants were grouped together or how the designers had achieved such a natural look. "See how they've used different heights and bloom times," Fiona pointed out, crouching beside a bed that mixed tall grasses with low-growing sedums. "There's structure underneath all of this, but it reads as wild because nothing is in rigid rows." Gabriel knelt beside her, and she was acutely aware of his presence, the warmth of him in the cool morning air. "Your father taught you well." "He taught me to pay attention," Fiona said softly. "To really see what's in front of me instead of what I expect to be there." When she turned her head, she found Gabriel watching her with an intensity that made her heart stutter. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her right there among the flowering perennials. Instead, he stood and offered her his hand to help her up. His hand was warm and strong, and he held on a moment longer than necessary after she regained her feet. They spent 4 hours exploring the gardens, talking about everything from his childhood in Vermont to her failed attempt to grow tomatoes on her apartment balcony. Gabriel was funny in an understated way, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard. He told her about the first property he ever developed, a small duplex he had renovated himself during business school, and how he had accidentally knocked through a supporting wall and had to hire a structural engineer to fix his mistake. "I thought my career was over before it started," he admitted as they sat on a bench overlooking a pond. "Instead, I learned that asking for help when you're out of your depth is not a weakness." "Is that what last night was?" Fiona asked. "Asking for help?" "That was recognizing that I needed a different perspective," Gabriel said. "I've surrounded myself with people who think like me for too long. Everyone agrees with my ideas, and no one challenges me to be better." "That sounds lonely," Fiona said before she could stop herself. Gabriel looked at her for a long moment. "It is." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Fiona felt something shift in her chest, a dangerous softening toward this man who had everything money could buy but seemed hungry for genuine connection. "Tell me something," Gabriel said. "When you're designing a space, what are you really trying to create?" Fiona considered the question carefully. "Possibility. I want to make places where people can imagine different versions of themselves. Where a kid can pretend to be an explorer or a tired parent can find 5 minutes of peace. Where neighbors might run into each other and actually talk." She paused. "I guess I'm trying to design spaces that encourage people to be more fully human." "That's what I want," Gabriel said with sudden urgency. "That's exactly what's been missing from every project I've done. I've been building impressive structures, but you're talking about building community and meaning." Before Fiona could respond, rain began to fall, fat drops that quickly became a downpour. They ran for the parking lot, laughing as they got soaked through. Gabriel's sweater clung to his shoulders and Fiona's hair dripped water down her back. In the car, with the rain drumming on the roof and the windows fogging up, Gabriel turned to her. "I haven't had this much fun in years." "We just looked at plants and got rained on," Fiona pointed out, but she was smiling. "Exactly," Gabriel said, and then he was leaning toward her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. Fiona could have pulled away. Should have, probably. Instead, she closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was soft at first, questioning. Then Gabriel's other hand tangled in her wet hair, and the kiss deepened, becoming urgent and hungry. Fiona pressed closer, her hands finding the solid muscle of his shoulders, and let herself fall into the feeling of being wanted by someone who saw her as more than just a service provider. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably tell you that I'm not good at casual." "Neither am I," Fiona whispered, "and this is complicated because we're working together. Very complicated." "I don't care," Gabriel said fiercely. "I haven't felt this alive in years, and I'm not going to apologize for that." Fiona pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "I'm not asking you to apologize, but we need to be smart about this. The Riverside project is important to both of us professionally." "Agreed," Gabriel said. "We keep work and personal separate. During business hours, you're my landscape architect. The rest of the time, you're the woman I'm completely falling for." The honesty in his words stole her breath. That was fast. "I know what I want when I find it," Gabriel said simply. "But if you need time to figure out how you feel, I can wait." Fiona thought about all the reasons this was a bad idea. The power dynamic, the professional complications, the fact that she had sworn off dating successful men after her last relationship ended with her ex telling her she was not ambitious enough for him. Gabriel represented everything she had decided to avoid, except he was not like her ex at all. He listened when she spoke, asked her opinion and actually valued it, and looked at her like she was extraordinary just for being herself. "I don't need time," she said. "I'm falling too." Over the next 3 weeks, Fiona lived in 2 worlds. During the day, she worked intensely on the Riverside designs, developing the concepts she and Gabriel had sketched into fully realized plans. She met with his project team, coordinated with architects and engineers, and presented to the City Planning Commission. In those meetings, Gabriel was professional and courteous, treating her exactly like any other consultant. But in the evenings and on weekends, they were simply Fiona and Gabriel, 2 people discovering each other. He took her to a tiny Vietnamese restaurant in a neighborhood she had never explored. She dragged him to a botanical lecture that he pretended to find boring but secretly enjoyed. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning the shapes of each other's thoughts. Gabriel was different outside of his office. Still confident and decisive, but with a gentleness that surprised her. He remembered small details she mentioned in passing, like how she preferred tea to coffee, or how she had been wanting to see a particular film. He opened doors and walked on the street side of the sidewalk, old-fashioned gestures that she found unexpectedly charming. One evening, he picked her up after work and drove to a property outside the city without telling her where they were going. When they pulled up to an old farmhouse surrounded by overgrown gardens, Fiona looked at him with confusion. "I bought it this morning," Gabriel said, and he actually looked nervous. "I know it's impulsive, but I couldn't stop thinking about creating something personal, not just another development. I was hoping you might help me figure out what to do with it." Fiona got out of the car slowly, taking in the property. The house needed work, but it had good bones with a wide front porch and tall windows. The land stretched for several acres, and she could see the remnants of what had once been gardens, now wild and overgrown. "You bought a farm," she said. "A small farm," Gabriel corrected. "More of a large house with land. Gabriel, what are you going to do with a farm?" He came to stand beside her, looking out at the property with something vulnerable in his expression. "I don't know yet. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. I just knew I needed to own something that was not about profit or return on investment. Something that could just exist because it's beautiful." Fiona felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. "Can I look around?" They explored the property together as the sun set, Gabriel pointing out potential, and Fiona mentally cataloging what plants might still be salvageable in the overgrown beds. There was an old greenhouse with half its glass panes broken, a stone foundation that might have once been a barn, and a cluster of apple trees that were still producing fruit despite years of neglect. "This could be amazing," Fiona said as they stood under the apple trees, the last light filtering through the leaves. "It would take years of work, but you could restore the gardens, renovate the house, create something really special." "Would you help me?" Gabriel asked. "Not as my landscape architect, but as my partner in this project." Fiona turned to face him. "Gabriel, that's a huge commitment." "I know," he said steadily. "I'm not afraid of commitment, not when it comes to you." The weight of his words settled over her. They had only been seeing each other for 3 weeks, but it felt like longer, like something essential had clicked into place between them. "I would love to help you," she said softly. Gabriel pulled her close and kissed her under the apple trees, and Fiona thought that maybe crazy decisions were not always bad ones. The Riverside project broke ground in late October, with Fiona's naturalistic designs approved by both the city and Gabriel's development team. There had been some resistance from his partners initially, concerned that the unconventional approach would not appeal to potential buyers. Gabriel had stood firm, and when early interest exceeded projections, the criticism faded quickly. Fiona attended the groundbreaking ceremony, standing with the crowd rather than on the dais with Gabriel and the other executives. She watched him give his speech about creating community spaces that prioritized people over profit, and felt proud of him for staying true to the vision they had developed together. After the ceremony, Gabriel's business partner, an older man named Richard, approached Fiona. "You're the landscape architect. Fiona O'Brien," she said, shaking his offered hand. "You've certainly made an impression on Gabriel," Richard said, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. "He's different lately, more willing to take risks." Fiona was not sure if that was a compliment or a criticism. He had a clear vision for what he wanted to achieve with this project. "And you helped him refine it," Richard said. "I've known Gabriel for 15 years, watched him build his company from nothing. He's brilliant, but he tends to get tunnel vision, focusing so hard on success that he forgets why he started. Whatever you did, it reminded him." Before Fiona could respond, Gabriel appeared at her elbow. "Richard, stop interrogating my consultant. Just getting to know the woman who has you buying random farms," Richard said with a slight smile and walked away. Gabriel turned to Fiona with an apologetic expression. "Sorry about him. He means well, but he has no sense of boundaries." "It's fine," Fiona said. "Though I'm curious how he knows about the farm." "I may have mentioned it," Gabriel admitted. "Several times. I'm not good at hiding when I'm excited about something." That evening they drove out to the farmhouse again, something they had started doing most weekends. Gabriel had hired contractors to start on essential repairs to the house, but they were taking the garden restoration slowly, with Fiona drawing up careful plans for each section. They walked the property as dusk fell, Gabriel's hand warm in hers. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what happens when Riverside is finished." "What do you mean?" "Right now, we have the excuse of the project. We see each other for legitimate professional reasons several times a week, and no one questions it. But once that's done, we won't have that cover anymore." Fiona had been trying not to think about that. Their relationship still felt fragile, like something that existed in a bubble outside of real life. "Are you worried people will have opinions?" "I'm worried you'll have opinions," Gabriel said, stopping to face her. "I'm significantly older than you, I'm your client, and I come with a level of public visibility that might not be comfortable for you. I don't want to be the reason your career gets overshadowed by gossip." Fiona had not expected this conversation. "How much older?" "I'm 38. "You're what, 28? 29 in 2 months, Fiona corrected. "That's not a scandalous age gap, Gabriel, and as for the rest, I knew what I was getting into." "Did you?" Gabriel challenged gently, "because I'm not sure I did. I thought this was just about being with someone who understood me, but it's so much more than that. You've changed how I see everything, and I'm terrified I'm going to mess this up." Fiona reached up to cup his face, feeling the slight stubble on his jaw. "You're not going to mess it up. And I'm tougher than you think. I can handle some gossip if it means being with you." Gabriel kissed her then, deep and passionate, and when they broke apart he said, "Move in with me." Fiona blinked. "What? Not in the city," Gabriel said quickly. "Here, move into the farmhouse with me. We can renovate it together, build something that's ours. I know it's fast, and if you're not ready, I understand, but I don't want to wait any more. I want to fall asleep with you every night and wake up with you every morning." Fiona's heart was racing. The smart thing would be to say it was too soon, that they needed more time. But when she looked at Gabriel, at the hope and vulnerability in his eyes, she knew her answer. "My lease is up at the end of November." The smile that broke across Gabriel's face was brilliant. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes," Fiona confirmed. And then she was being lifted off her feet and spun around, both of them laughing. Moving in together was chaotic and wonderful. Fiona's studio apartment yielded surprisingly little, most of her possessions consisting of books and plants. Gabriel hired movers for the furniture, but they transported her plant collection themselves, filling his car with pots and arguing cheerfully about where each one would get the best light in their new home. The farmhouse was still under renovation, with contractors working on the kitchen and bathrooms, but the bedroom was finished, and the living room was livable. They set up a temporary kitchen in what would eventually be a mudroom, and ate most of their meals sitting on the porch watching the sunset. Fiona had worried that living together might reveal incompatibilities, but instead, it felt natural. Gabriel was tidy but not obsessive, and he seemed to genuinely enjoy her habit of leaving gardening books scattered throughout the house. She learned that he woke early and liked to go for runs before sunrise, and that he was a surprisingly good cook when he made the effort. He discovered that she sang off-key in the shower and hoarded seeds from every plant she encountered. They fell into routines easily. Gabriel still went into the city several days a week for meetings, but he had started working from home more often, converting one of the upstairs rooms into an office. Fiona split her time between finishing the Riverside project and beginning work on their own property. One Saturday morning in December, Fiona woke to find Gabriel already up, standing at the bedroom window looking out at the frost-covered garden. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and joined him. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. "How different my life is from a year ago," Gabriel said. "Last December, I was closing a deal on a high-rise downtown. I worked through Christmas and New Year's, barely noticed the holidays passing. I was successful and miserable and did not even realize it." Fiona leaned against his side and his arm came around her automatically. And now I have you and this place and actual reasons to look forward to weekends. He pressed a kiss to her temple. I never thought I could have this. What? A half-renovated farmhouse and a girlfriend who tracks mud inside? Fiona teased gently. A home, Gabriel said seriously. A real home, not just a place I sleep between work commitments, and someone who sees me as more than just the successful businessman. Fiona turned to wrap her arms around him, blanket and all. You're so much more than that. They spent the day working in the garden despite the cold, Fiona directing as they planted bulbs that would bloom in spring. Gabriel proved surprisingly adept at following her instructions, and they worked well together, falling into an easy rhythm. As the sun set and they sat on the porch drinking hot tea, Gabriel said, My parents want to meet you. Fiona nearly dropped her mug. What? They called yesterday while you were in the city. I told them I was seeing someone, and my mother immediately demanded to know when she could meet you. I think the fact that I bought a farmhouse and am actively renovating it convinced her that this is serious. Is it? Fiona asked, even though she knew the answer. Serious. Gabriel set down his tea and took her cold hands in his. Fiona, I'm more serious about you than I've been about anything in my life. I know we haven't been together that long, but I've never been more certain of anything. I feel the same way, Fiona admitted. It terrifies me sometimes how much I love you. It was the first time either of them had said the words out loud. Gabriel's eyes widened, and then he was kissing her, desperate and tender all at once. I love you too, he said against her lips. God, I love you so much. They met Gabriel's parents the week before Christmas at a restaurant in the city. Fiona was nervous, changing outfits 3 times before Gabriel finally told her she looked beautiful and they needed to leave or they would be late. His parents were warmer than she expected. His father, Gregory, was a retired teacher with kind eyes and a firm handshake. His mother, Margaret, hugged Fiona immediately and told her she was delighted to finally meet the woman who had convinced Gabriel to buy a farm. Over dinner, they asked about her work and her family and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. Margaret told stories about Gabriel as a child, much to his embarrassment, and Gregory asked thoughtful questions about sustainable landscape design. We were worried about him, Margaret said as dessert arrived. He worked so hard for so long and it seemed like he had forgotten how to enjoy life, but you've changed that. Mom, Gabriel protested, but he was smiling. It's true, Gregory said. You seem happy, son. Really happy, not just successful. I am happy, Gabriel said, reaching over to take Fiona's hand. Happier than I knew I could be. The approval in his parents' eyes made Fiona's throat tight with emotion. Her own parents had passed away in a car accident 3 years ago, and she had not realized how much she missed the feeling of family until this moment. Later, as they drove back to the farmhouse, Fiona said, Your parents are wonderful. They liked you, Gabriel said. Not that there was any doubt. You're easy to love. Fiona looked over at him, at the strong profile illuminated by dashboard lights, and felt overwhelmed by the certainty that this was her future. This man, this life they were building together. Marry me, she said impulsively. Gabriel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. What? Marry me, Fiona repeated, more certain now. I know I'm supposed to wait for you to ask, and this probably is not how it's supposed to happen, but I don't care. I love you, and I want to spend my life with you, and I don't want to wait. Gabriel pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to face her, his expression intense. Are you serious? Completely serious. Because I've been carrying a ring around for 2 weeks trying to figure out the perfect moment to propose, Gabriel said, and pulled a small box from his jacket pocket. Fiona started laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you kidding me?" "I was going to do it on Christmas morning," Gabriel said, opening the box to reveal a beautiful emerald-cut diamond. "I had this whole plan involving breakfast and the sunrise, but this is better. This is perfect." "So is that a yes?" Fiona asked through her tears. "That's absolutely a yes," Gabriel said, and slid the ring onto her finger before kissing her thoroughly. They got married in April in the garden at the farmhouse, which by then was beginning to bloom with the bulbs they had planted in December. It was a small ceremony, just close friends and family, exactly what both of them wanted. Fiona wore a simple ivory dress and carried wildflowers from the property. Gabriel wore a suit but no tie, and when Fiona walked down the makeshift aisle, the look on his face made her cry before she even reached him. They wrote their own vows. Fiona promised to always challenge him to think differently, to make sure their home stayed filled with life and growing things, to love him through all the seasons of their lives together. Gabriel promised to never stop seeing her as his partner in all things, to value her wisdom, to build a life with her that prioritized joy over achievement. When they kissed as husband and wife, their guests cheered, and Fiona felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The Riverside project was completed in June, and it was everything they had envisioned. The naturalistic gardens created spaces for exploration and discovery, with winding paths and mixed plantings that looked like they had grown there naturally. The community garden plots were already full, with residents planting vegetables and flowers side by side. Children played hide and seek in the shrub borders, and Fiona saw more than one couple sitting on hidden benches holding hands. At the grand opening, Gabriel gave a speech crediting Fiona's vision for transforming his initial concept into something meaningful. She stood in the crowd holding his hand, proud of what they had created together. But it was the farmhouse that became their true masterpiece. Over the next year, they finished the renovations on the house and began seriously restoring the gardens. Fiona's design was ambitious, incorporating vegetable beds, an orchard, pollinator meadows, and formal garden rooms that flowed into wild spaces. Gabriel threw himself into the project with the same intensity he had once reserved for business deals. But now, it was channeled into something life-giving rather than just profitable. He learned to prune apple trees and build raised beds, and took enormous pride in growing food they could eat. They hosted dinners for friends, long evenings on the porch that stretched late into the night. They adopted a dog, a rescue mutt named Pepper who loved to dig in Fiona's garden beds. They fought sometimes, about silly things like whether to paint the bathroom blue or green, but they always worked through it. Richard visited one autumn weekend, bringing his wife to see what Gabriel had done with the place. As they walked the property, Richard said to Fiona, "You know, I was skeptical when Gabriel first changed direction with Riverside. I thought he was having some kind of crisis, but I was wrong. This is what real success looks like." Fiona watched Gabriel across the garden, laughing as Pepper tried to steal an apple from his hand, and felt profound gratitude for that Friday evening when he had asked her to scrap everything and start over. 2 years after their wedding, Fiona discovered she was pregnant. She told Gabriel on a Saturday morning in the garden, handing him a tiny packet of seeds labeled baby's breath, with a note that said, "Coming next spring." It took him a moment to understand, and then he was picking her up and spinning her around, both of them crying and laughing. "We're having a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. Their daughter, Grace, was born on a warm day in May, with her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes. Gabriel cried when he held her for the first time, and Fiona fell even more in love with him watching him become a father. They brought Grace home to the farmhouse, to the garden that was in full spring bloom. Gabriel had built a cradle from wood reclaimed from the old barn, and Fiona had sewn blankets from fabric printed with botanical illustrations. On Grace's first night home, they stood together over her cradle watching her sleep, Gabriel's arm around Fiona's waist. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For walking into my office that night and proposing something crazy. For seeing who I could be and challenging me to become that person. For building this life with me." Fiona leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the scent of the roses blooming outside the window. "Thank you for being brave enough to ask for something different, for choosing meaning over just success, for loving me the way you do." Gabriel kissed the top of her head. "Best decision I ever made." Below them, Grace made a small sound in her sleep, and they both smiled. Outside, the garden they had planted together was flourishing, wild and beautiful and full of life. It was not the life either of them had planned, but it was better than anything they could have imagined. This, Fiona thought, was what home felt like. Not a place, but the people you chose to share your life with, the gardens you planted together, the love you cultivated through seasons of growth and change. She reached for Gabriel's hand, and he squeezed back, and they stood together in the quiet house watching their daughter dream, knowing that the best was yet to come. Years would pass, and they would plant more gardens, renovate more properties, raise their daughter to appreciate the beauty in wild things. Gabriel would shift his business focus towards sustainable community development, with Fiona as his partner in both marriage and vision. They would face challenges and celebrations, losses and joys, always returning to this place they had created together. But in this moment, everything was perfect. The farmhouse they had restored, the garden blooming outside, the baby sleeping soundly, and the two of them standing together, partners in all things. Fiona remembered that Friday night 2.5 years ago when she had nervously suggested something crazy, never imagining it would lead to this. Gabriel had been right. Crazy was exactly what he needed. It was exactly what they both needed.